Did you change the password for the card, you useless old hag? My own son's words cut through the silence of my living room like a sharp knife. I can still feel the tremor in my wrinkled hands as I held the phone that night. For a moment, I stood paralyzed looking at the family photos on the shelf, memories of times that seemed to belong to another life. It was the voice of the boy I once cradled in my arms, now transformed into a furious growl on the other end of the line. I want to pay for dinner here. Tell me the password before I do something to you. My name is Emily Carter. I am 67 years old, and I live in Chicago in a modest apartment in the Lincoln Park neighborhood, the same apartment where I raised my 2 children, where I spent 40 years with my husband until he passed away, and where I now live alone with my plants and my books. I was a librarian for my entire professional life at the public library. Books were always my best friends. They taught me about the world and about people, but no book prepared me for what I would have to face in my own family, that call. It happened on a Thursday in winter. The Chicago wind felt even sharper that night. While the city was covered in a light fog, I was wrapped in a blanket I had knitted myself, watching a cooking show. My gray hair was tied in a loose bun, and I wore my reading glasses hanging on the amethyst chain that I rarely took off a gift from my late husband. The soft lighting in my living room contrasted with the darkness in my soul at that moment. Do you know that feeling that something inside you is broken? That was exactly what I felt when I heard Michael calling me a useless old hag. It was not the first time he spoke to me like that, but that night something changed. Maybe it was the even more aggressive tone. Maybe the accumulated exhaustion of years of small abuses that grew silently like weeds in a neglected garden. Michael was at the Golden Steer, a fancy steakhouse in the Gold Coast district. He had taken his wife, Linda, and her mother, Susan, to an expensive dinner. It was not unusual. My son always had refined tastes and a constant need to impress others. What he did not have was enough money to maintain that lifestyle. And that was where I entered the equation, or rather, where my retirement and my savings entered. When I retired at 62, I had a stable financial situation. Years of dedicated work, a modest inheritance from my husband, and cautious investments guaranteed me a dignified old age. At least that is what I thought. But little by little, like water, slowly seeping through the cracks of a house, Michael was taking control of my finances. At first, they were small loans. "Mom, I am going through a tough time. I will pay you back later." Then suggestions that I was no longer in a condition to manage my money. "Did you confuse the bills twice already? Let me take care of this." Power of attorney documents were signed, additional credit cards were made, and when I realized it, I no longer knew how much I had, how much I owed, or where my money was going. That night, something strange happened. The bank system detected suspicious activities and automatically blocked my card. A blessing disguised as a setback. Michael could not pay the bill at the expensive restaurant, and the mask of the concerned son fell completely when he called me. As I held the phone and listened to his threats, I looked at the small picture frame on the coffee table. It was a photo of him as a child with that smile missing baby teeth, holding a fish we had caught together. How did we get to this point? At what moment did that boy with bright eyes transform into this man who threatened me over the phone? Memories flashed like a movie through my mind. His birth, my firstborn, how I had cried with joy, holding him for the first time. The first steps, the first words. The games in the park near home, the report cards proudly hung on the fridge, and then the first signs that something was not right. The small lies, the growing demands, the constant irritation when he did not get what he wanted. My friend Margaret had warned me several times. "Emily, that boy is exploiting you," but I always defended my son. "He is just going through a rough patch," I would say. How hard it is for a mother to admit she raised someone capable of hurting her. It is like a confession of failure, a wound that never closes completely. But that night, with those cruel words ringing in my ears, something woke up inside me, a strength I did not even know still existed. a clarity that cut through the fog of denial I had created myself. It was as if an inner voice whispered, "Enough, this far and no further." With a calmness that surprised me, I answered, "I am not going to tell you the password, Michael." On the other side of the line, the momentary silence was followed by an even greater explosion of rage, threats, insults, emotional blackmail, the complete repertoire of a cornered abuser. And then I did something I had never done before. I hung up the phone in the middle of his speech. My hands were shaking, but my decision was made. As I placed the phone back on the base, I noticed that the call recording app that Margaret had helped me install days before was still running. Just as a precaution, she had said, that little icon blinking on the phone screen would be the first step of my liberation, although I did not know it yet. I remembered Sarah, then my daughter, who lived in Seattle, so different from her brother. Always worried, always kind but distant geographically and emotionally from what was happening here. Years of Michael's manipulation kept her away, convinced that I was becoming senile, that I exaggerated, that I needed the care only her brother could offer. How I wished I could hug her in that moment and tell her that everything was okay, that I had finally woken up. The clock in the living room marked 9:47 p.m. when I finished that call. A banal moment for most people, but for me, it represented a dividing line in my life. The before and after the submission and the resistance, the fear and the courage. I got up slowly, feeling the weight of age in my knees that were no longer so strong, and walked to the window. The city out there continued its nightlife, indifferent to the small drama unfolding in apartment 402 of the Lincoln Park building. Cars passed, lights blinked, people returned home not knowing that in that exact moment, a 67-year-old woman decided she would no longer be a victim. What I would do next would change the dynamic of my family forever, and perhaps inspire other people in the same situation. Because if there is one thing I learned in all those years, as a librarian, it is that stories have power. And my story was just beginning to be rewritten. People always ask me where I got the strength to confront my own son. You who are watching me now might be asking the same thing. From what deep place inside me did that sudden courage come? Maybe you also want to know how it is possible to start over at 67 when the world seems to expect you to just resign yourself and wait for time to pass. Many of you probably know someone in the same situation, a grandfather, an aunt, an older neighbor, who suffers in silence, who has their resources drained by relatives, who faces daily humiliations disguised as care. Or maybe you yourself are living something similar and found this channel by chance, looking for a light, a path, an example that it is possible to say no. Where are you from? Have you witnessed situations like mine? If you are watching me and identify with this story, I want you to know that you are not alone. There is a whole community here on the Elderly Stories channel of people who understand what you are going through, who have lived similar experiences and found the strength to change their stories. As I faced the night through my window, I knew Michael would come home soon, more furious than ever. What he did not know was that for the first time in years, I would be prepared. I would no longer be the easy prey he expected to find. The following hours would be crucial, and I needed to act quickly before the sun came up that morning. While I waited for Michael's inevitable return, I began to mentally relive how everything had reached that point. The story did not start with that aggressive call. No, the road to abuse was long and winding, almost imperceptible at first, like a slow poison that infiltrates the body without you noticing the symptoms until it is too late. Everything changed after the passing of my husband, Robert. For 43 years, he was my partner, my safe harbor. I still remember the day the doctor gave us the diagnosis pancreatic cancer advanced stage. 6 months at most, he said with that clinical and distant voice. Robert lasted barely 4. It was months of hospitals, pain medications, sleepless nights. And I was there holding his hand until the last breath. The grief was a dark and deep abyss. In the first months after his departure, I could barely get out of bed. The apartment, once full of life and conversations, became a mausoleum of memories. The silence was deafening. My daughter Sarah came from Seattle for the funeral. She stayed 2 weeks with me, but needed to return to her job, to her life. The geographic distance was always an obstacle between us, despite the love that united us. It was in that vulnerable period that Michael began to appear more frequently. At first, I confess, it was a relief. My son, who had always been so busy, so distant, now came to visit me almost daily. He brought groceries, checked my medications, asked about my medical appointments. I was so fragile that I interpreted everything as a genuine approach, an awakening of dormant filial feelings. "Mom, you are not eating well," he would say, looking at the empty fridge. "I am going to start doing your grocery shopping." And so it began. Small gestures, apparently innocent, that in retrospect were the first steps of a calculated plan. On a rainy Sunday afternoon, about 6 months after Robert passed away, Michael appeared with Linda, his wife. It was rare for her to come, always so busy with her architecture firm. They brought a cake from the bakery I liked and sat with me in the living room. It was when Michael mentioned the issue of finances for the first time. "Mom," I was thinking, "you are alone now in these banking issues. Bills, investments, they are complicated. Dad always took care of that, right? I think you should let me help." It was true that Robert was always more organized with finances, but it was not as if I were incapable. I was a head librarian for 2 decades, managed budgets, supervised teams. Still, in that moment of fragility, the offer seemed sensible. After all, he was my son, blood of my blood. What harm could there be? Let's do this. He continued with that smile that reminded me so much of when he was a boy. "I will help you organize everything, but you keep control. It is just to give you a hand in this difficult phase." Linda, sitting next to him, nodded with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Mrs. Carter, it will be better this way. You do not need to worry about all this bureaucracy now." A week later, Michael showed up with some papers. "They are just some basic powers of attorney so I can resolve things at the bank for you without you needing to leave the house. I signed without reading properly. My mistake, a mistake I would pay dearly for in the coming years. It was all so gradual." First, Michael suggested consolidating my accounts into a single bank, the same one where he had an account. To make management easier, he explained. Then he proposed that I cancel some credit cards. "Many cards are a security risk, Mom." Next, he began to bring bank statements already organized for me to see. "It is all under control, do not worry." When I noticed that I was no longer receiving mail from the bank, I questioned him. "I changed the delivery address to my house," Michael explained. "The mail was piling up here, and you would not even know. It is safer this way." With every small change, there was a reasonable explanation and apparently logical justification. And I, wanting to believe in my son's concern, kept ceding ground 1 inch at a time, until one day I found myself completely surrounded with no way out. About a year after Robert's death, I began to notice some inconsistencies. My retirement money seemed to run out faster and faster. When I questioned Michael, he always had a prepared answer. "Mom, do not, you remember." "We paid for the air conditioning repair last week." "Oh, you asked to buy that new medication yourself, the one insurance does not cover." And so slowly the gaslighting began, that cruel psychological manipulation where they make you doubt your own sanity, your own memory. "You are forgetting things, Mom. It is normal at your age." That phrase became recurrent, a sharp sword Michael used to cut down any questioning of mine. It was around that time that I got to know Susan Miller, Linda's mother, more deeply. She began to frequent my house along with the couple. At first I thought it was just company, maybe an attempt to console my widowhood. Later I understood her true role. Susan was a retired psychologist, and she used her knowledge not to help but to manipulate. "Emily, that mental confusion you are feeling is typical of prolonged grief," she would say with that soft, professional voice. "You need to trust Michael more. He only wants what is best for you. When I turned 65, things got significantly worse." Michael showed up with a lawyer, a man with a cold gaze who barely spoke to me. They brought more papers for me to sign. It is just an update of the powers of attorney Mom. Nothing important. This time I tried to read, but Michael got impatient. Mom, the lawyer, has other appointments. We cannot spend all afternoon on this. I signed, pressured and confused. I would only discover months later that among those documents was an authorization for the sale of a small plot of land that Robert and I had bought as an investment for our old age. When I questioned about the money from the sale, Michael reacted with indignation. But Mom, we talked about this. You agreed that we needed the money to renovate the bathroom here to install safety bars. The bathroom was never renovated. The safety bars were never installed. And the money? Well, the money disappeared like smoke. It was around that time I began to perceive a pattern. Whenever I questioned something related to finances, I received a joint visit, Michael, Linda, and Susan. It was as if they had a silent pact. Michael would talk, Linda would confirm everything with nods, and Susan would give the psychological verdict. Emily, this confusion of yours is worrying. Maybe we should schedule an appointment with a neurologist. The veiled threat was clear. Keep questioning. And we are going to suggest that you are senile. We are going to question your mental capacity. And who would believe you against the three of us? Slowly, I became isolated. Old friends called, invited me to lunches, movies, but Michael always had an excuse. Mom, you are not well enough to go out today, right? Or I already scheduled a doctor for you at that time. Little by little, the invitations decreased. The calls became spaced out until I found myself alone, trapped in an invisible cage. My only connection with the outside world became Margaret Sullivan, my friend of decades. She lived in the same building 3 floors up and began to notice my gradual isolation. One afternoon, when Michael had left quickly to resolve a problem at the bank, she knocked on my door. Emily, what is happening to you? I have not seen you at the book club meeting for months. Her sharp eyes examined me from top to bottom. She realized I had lost weight, that my clothes were looser, that my hair, always so well kept, had gone months without a cut. It was the first time I cried since Robert's death. The tears came like a summer storm, sudden, intense, purifying. I told Margaret everything, the documents, the bills, the manipulations, the money disappearing, the accusations of mental confusion. She listened in silence, holding my wrinkled hands in hers, equally marked by time. Emily, what you are describing has a name. Financial abuse against the elderly, and from what I see, there is also psychological abuse involved. Margaret, always so direct, did not soften the truth, and the worst part is that it comes from your own son. Hearing those words was like receiving a slap in the face. Part of me wanted to deny it, to defend Michael, to find excuses for his behavior. After all, what mother wants to admit she raised a monster? What mother wants to accept that the baby she breastfed, the boy she taught to ride a bike, was now systematically exploiting her? What can I do? I asked, feeling defeated. The feeling of helplessness was crushing. Margaret, with her experience as a retired nurse, had seen similar cases throughout her career. First, we need to document everything. Every conversation, every bank statement, you can get every document he made you sign. And second, you need to regain control of your communications. That was how, hiding from Michael, I got a basic prepaid cell phone which I kept hidden inside the cover of a thick book in the library, War and Peace by Tolstoy, a book I was certain my son would never pick up to read. Margaret also helped me install a call recording app on the apartment's landline, the very one that would capture the fateful restaurant call months later. The sensation of doing something, of acting instead of just reacting, brought a new spirit to my life. I began to pay more attention, to document every conversation in a small notebook I kept hidden inside my pillowcase. Every suspicious withdrawal from the account, every derogatory comment, every lie I managed to detect. Everything went into that notebook, my little ark of evidence. Meanwhile, Michael continued his game of manipulation. The inexplicable expenses grew. I discovered by chance that he had made an additional card from my account and used it freely. When I questioned him, the answer was always the same. "It is for your expenses, Mom. You asked me to buy your medications, remember?" In a particularly tense visit about 2 months before the restaurant call, I noticed a new watch on Michael's wrist, an expensive model I knew he could not afford with his salary. Linda also appeared with designer handbags that did not match the supposed financial crisis the couple claimed to be facing. That was when I understood it was not just a matter of control, it was blatant theft. They were using my money, the fruit of decades of honest work, to maintain a luxurious lifestyle they could not afford. I began to wonder if Sarah, my distant daughter, had any idea what was happening. In the rare times we managed to talk on the phone, always when Michael was not around, she seemed to believe her brother's version that I was getting confused, forgetful. "Mom, Michael told me you left the stove on the other day," she said in one of those conversations. "I am worried maybe it would be better if you went to live with him or hired a caregiver." The most painful part was realizing my own daughter was being manipulated against me. Michael had woven his web of lies so skillfully that even Sarah, always so sharp, had fallen into it. The physical distance facilitated the manipulation. She could not see with her own eyes what was happening. She depended only on her brother's accounts. Months passed, and I continued collecting evidence recording conversations, noting discrepancies. Margaret was crucial in that process, helping me maintain my sanity, reinforcing that no, I was not confused. I was not imagining things. The abuse was real. 2 weeks before the restaurant call, something happened that turned on a red alert in Margaret's head. During a visit, Michael lost his patience when I asked about a large withdrawal that had appeared on the bank statement I managed to get in secret. "Mom, stop with that paranoia. You are going senile." He slammed the table hard, making the picture frames shake. His eyes had a terrifying shine, something I had never seen before. For a moment, I feared he might physically assault me. Linda, who was present, did nothing to calm him down. On the contrary, she seemed irritated with me for provoking Michael. "Mrs. Carter, you need to trust your son more. He only wants what is best for you." After they left, I called Margaret, shaking. She came to my apartment immediately. "Emily, this has crossed all limits. We need to act now before things get worse." It was she who suggested I contact Sergeant William Miller, an old friend who now worked at the precinct for elderly protection. "You do not need to make a formal complaint yet if you do not feel ready, but he can guide you on the next steps." I hesitated. Despite everything, the idea of reporting my own son caused me deep pain. What mother does that? What mother hands her son over to the police? The internal conflict was heartbreaking. Part of me still hoped for redemption, a moment of regret, a sincere apology that never came. I ended up not calling William that day. That was one more mistake that would cost me dearly. If I had acted sooner, maybe I would have avoided what happened at the restaurant. Maybe I would have spared myself hearing those cruel words. "Useless old hag." The morning after the restaurant call, with Michael's words still echoing in my mind, I finally took courage. I took the hidden cell phone and called the number Margaret had given me. William's deep voice on the other end of the line brought a strange comfort. "Mrs. Carter, long time no see. How can I help you?" Upon hearing my story, William's friendly tone changed to something more professional, more serious. "Emily, what you are describing are crimes. Serious crimes. We need to act quickly." And so, on that cold morning in Chicago, I began to weave the net that would capture my own son. A net made of painful truths, carefully collected evidence, and above all, the determination of a woman who at 67 decided she would no longer be a victim. When I hung up the phone, I looked again at the photo of Michael as a child on the shelf. The smiling boy with the fish in his hands seemed like a stranger now. Someone I no longer recognized in the man he had become. The grief for this lost son, not to death but to greed and cruelty, was a new kind of pain I would have to learn to carry. The clock showed 8:30 in the morning. William would come to my apartment at 10 DU, along with Mr. Edward Davis, the lawyer specializing in elderly rights he had recommended. We had few hours to prepare everything before Michael appeared. Furious for not being able to pay the restaurant bill the night before while I waited, I organized all the documents I had secretly collected in the last months. The notes in the hidden notebook, the bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, the recordings of conversations where Michael manipulated and insulted me. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of the relationship we once had. The plan starting to form in my mind was not about revenge, it was about justice, about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my right to age in peace. And if for that I needed to confront my own son, then so be it. At 10 sharp, the doorbell of my apartment rang. Through the peephole, I immediately recognized the robust figure of Sergeant William Miller, gray hair, well-trimmed, upright posture that betrayed his years in the police force, and those attentive eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. Beside him was a thinner man in a dark suit with a leather briefcase. Mr. Edward Davis, I assumed. I opened the door with my heart beating fast. It was as if by letting them in, I was definitely crossing a line of no return. Emily William hugged me with affection, that hug of an old friend that brings immediate comfort. "This is Mr. Edward Davis, the lawyer I mentioned." The man extended his hand firmly. "Mrs. Carter, it is a pleasure to meet you." Despite the circumstances, Margaret was already there with me, having arrived earlier to give me moral support. I offered coffee to everyone, that ritual that always precedes serious conversations. While I served the cups with slightly trembling hands, I tried to organize mentally everything I needed to tell. Emily started William after the first sip. "I want you to know that what you are facing is more common than you imagine. Unfortunately, we see cases like yours almost daily at the precinct for the elderly." Mr. Davis nodded, placing his cup on the coffee table. Financial abuse against the elderly is one of the most underreported forms of domestic violence. Victims rarely report out of shame or fear. Or out of love, I added in a low voice, feeling the weight of that word. "Exactly," confirmed the lawyer. "The emotional bond makes everything more complex." I spent the next hour recounting in detail everything that had happened in the last few years. I showed the notebook, the bank statements I managed to hide, and finally I played the recording of the call from the night before. Those harsh words that had been the straw that broke the camel's back. William listened to the recording with a furrowed brow while Mr. Davis made quick notes on a small pad. When Michael's voice calling me a useless old hag echoed in the room, I saw Margaret press her lips into a thin line of indignation. "This is clear evidence of psychological abuse," said Mr. Davis, closing his pad. "Combined with the financial documentation you collected, we have grounds for a formal complaint." William leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Emily, we need to talk about the next steps. Michael will certainly come here today, probably furious about not being able to pay the restaurant bill." A shiver ran down my spine. I knew well my son's explosive temper. What should I do? "First, we are going to install discrete cameras here in the apartment," explained William. "We need to document any future interaction," Mr. Davis added. "And we are going to prepare legal measures to revoke the powers of attorney and protect your assets. But that takes time. For now, the important thing is your physical safety." Physical safety. I never thought I would reach the point of fearing for my physical integrity with my own son. How did we get to this point? The same question echoed in my mind like a broken record. While we discussed the details of the plan, Margaret, always practical, prepared more coffee. The comforting aroma filled the apartment, contrasting with the gravity of the conversation. "And if he comes before we install the cameras?" I asked, the anxiety evident in my voice. "I will leave a plainclothes officer in the building lobby," answered William. "Any problem, just call this number." He handed me a card with a cell phone number written by hand on the back. When they prepared to leave, I promised to send a message as soon as Michael appeared. Margaret decided to stay with me, even if it is to scare that boy with my angry face. She said, making me crack a weak smile, The wait was agonizing. Every noise in the hallway, every elevator stopping on the floor made me jump. To occupy my mind, I prepared lunch, a simple vegetable soup I could barely eat. Margaret insisted I eat with that affectionate authority of a retired nurse. It was only at 3 in the afternoon that my cell phone rang. It was Michael. "I am coming over," he said dryly, without greetings. "We need to talk about last night. I will be waiting." I answered with a calm I did not feel. As soon as I hung up, I sent a message to William as we had agreed. In 15 minutes, a technician arrived discreetly to install miniaturized cameras in strategic points of the living room. Small, almost imperceptible, those electronic eyes would be my silent witnesses. Margaret squeezed my hand. "Do you want me to stay here when he arrives?" I thought for a moment. Maybe it would be better to face him alone. If Margaret were present, Michael might restrain himself. He would not show his true face. "No, my friend, it is better if you go, but stay in your apartment, please." At 4 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. I breathed deep 3 times like Margaret had taught me to control anxiety. I opened the door. Michael entered like a storm without waiting for an invitation. He was wearing the same clothes from the night before, a sign that he probably had not gone home. His eyes were bloodshot, beard unshaven, the smell of alcohol emanating from him. What kind of stunt was that last night? He shot throwing his keys on the sideboard with unnecessary force. I kept my voice calm, although my heart was beating fast. "What stunt, Michael? Do not play dumb." He walked from one side of the room to the other like a caged animal. "Why did you block the card?" "I did not block anything. The bank must have detected some suspicious activity." He laughed. "A sound without humor? Suspicious activity? The only problem is that you do not trust your own son." I sat on the sofa trying to appear calmer than I really was. I knew every word was being recorded. "Why did you need my card to pay for dinner? Do not you have your own money?" The direct question seemed to take him by surprise. For a moment he hesitated. Then the mask fell completely. "My money? Do you think I earn enough to maintain the life we lead? Someone has to take care of you, and that costs, you know. Take care of me?" I repeated, feeling indignation grow. "Is that what you call caring? Insulting me? Threatening me? Spending my money in expensive restaurants?" Michael approached, leaning over me in an intimidating manner. "You do not understand anything about finances, never did. If it were not for me, you would have lost everything already." I kept my gaze fixed on his without backing down. "The only one making me lose everything is you, Michael." Something changed in his eyes, a flash of pure rage that made me fear for what would come next. He grabbed my arm forcefully, his fingers digging into my thin, elderly skin. "Listen well, you are going to call the bank now and unblock that card, and you are going to give me the new password. Understood?" It was at that moment that the physical pain woke something up inside me, a strength I did not know I still possessed. With my free hand, I pushed his arm away violently. "Get your hands off me!" My voice came out loud, firm. "You will never touch me again, and you will not see another penny of my money." Surprised by my reaction, he stepped back. The confusion on his face quickly gave way to a barely contained fury. "Have you gone completely crazy?" he growled. "Do you think you can live without my help? You can barely remember to take your medications correctly. I am perfectly lucid, Michael." I answered, standing up to face him as an equal despite the difference in height. "Lucid enough to see who you really have become." He laughed again, that cruel laugh that did not belong to the boy I raised. "And who is going to believe you? The confused old woman or the dedicated son who sacrifices his time to care for his senile mother?" "We have proof," I said simply. Those 3 words caused a visible effect. Michael froze his face, a mask of surprise. "Proof? What are you talking about? About the unauthorized bank transfers, the withdrawals, the powers of attorney you made me sign under false pretenses." I paused, allowing every word to penetrate. About the call last night that was recorded. The color drained from his face. For a moment, I saw the scared boy of old caught in some mischief. "You are bluffing," he murmured, but without conviction. "Call the National Bank and ask why the card was blocked," I challenged. "They will inform you it was because they detected suspicious activity, high-value purchases in jewelry stores and luxury shops in the last weeks, purchases I never authorized." Michael ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I knew well. The facade was beginning to crumble. It was just a misunderstanding. He tried changing tactics. I was going to replace it all, I swear. "How did you replace the money from the land you sold?" I asked, arching an eyebrow. "Or the money from the savings my father left for my retirement?" He began to pace the room again, agitated. "You do not understand. We are going through hard times. Linda's architecture firm is not doing well. We have bills to pay, and the solution is to rob your own mother." The word rob seemed to hit him like a slap. His expression hardened again. "It is not theft if the money stays in the family. You are not going to live forever. And who is going to inherit everything?" "Me and Sarah. I am just speeding up the process." The cruelty of that declaration hit me full on. To him, I was already just an obstacle between him and my money, an inconvenience that fortunately had an expiration date. "Get out of my house," I said, voice trembling, not from fear but from indignation. Now he gave a laugh of scorn. "You cannot kick me out. Who is going to take care of you? I can take care of myself. I always could. And if I need help, I have real friends." I walked to the door and opened it. "Get out before I call the police." Michael approached slowly, his face inches from mine. "This is not going to stay like this," he whispered. "You are going to regret this." I maintained a firm posture, even though my heart beat out of rhythm. "The only thing I regret is not seeing who you really are sooner." When the door closed behind him, my legs finally gave way. I slid to the floor, back against the door, my whole body shaking. Tears I had held back during the entire confrontation finally came. Not of sadness, but of relief, of liberation. After a few minutes, I managed to compose myself enough to take my cell phone and send a message to William. He just left. "I am okay." The answer came almost instantly. "We saw everything. We are coming over." In 20 minutes, my apartment was full again. William, Mr. Davis, Margaret, who came down running as soon as she knew, and a young woman introduced to me as Laura Walsh, a social worker from the Senior Reference Center. "You were very brave, ma'am," said Laura, holding my hands. "Many people in your situation never managed to take this step." Mr. Davis was already on the phone talking about precautionary measures, blocking accounts, and revoking powers of attorney. William was reviewing the camera recordings, his face grave. He threatened her, clearly commented the police officer showing a specific clip on the tablet, and there was physical aggression when he held her arm. "We have enough for a police report and possibly a restraining order." The words restraining order hit me hard. I never imagined I would need legal protection against my own son. "What happens now?" I asked, voice firmer than I expected. Mr. Davis hung up the phone and sat next to me. "We are going to act quickly on several fronts. First, an extrajudicial notification for Michael informing him that all powers of attorney are revoked. Second, a request for a restraining order to prevent him from approaching you or this apartment. Third, a complete audit of your accounts to document all unauthorized transfers," William added. "And we are going to formalize the complaint for financial abuse, threats, and assault. The recording of yesterday's call and today's video are solid evidence." Laura, the social worker, added in a gentle tone, "We are also going to offer psychological counseling, Mrs. Carter. Situations like this leave deep marks." I nodded, unable to formulate words at that moment. The reality of what was happening, that I was effectively reporting my son to the police, was overwhelming. "And Sarah?" I asked finally. "My daughter needs to know." Margaret, who had remained silent until then, squeezed my shoulder. "I already called her. She is taking the next flight from Seattle. I thanked my friend mentally, who thought of everything. Sarah needed to hear from me personally what had happened. Years of Michael's manipulation had certainly distorted her perception of my situation. The following hours passed in a blur of phone calls, documents to sign, and decisions to make. When everyone finally left with the promise to return in the morning, I found myself alone in the silence of the apartment. The same apartment where I raised my children, where I lived with my husband, now seemed different. A battlefield of a war I did not choose to fight. I went to the shelf and took the picture frame with the photo of Michael as a child. That innocent smile, those bright eyes. Where had that boy gotten lost? At what moment did ambition and greed replace love? Was there something I could have done differently? The phone rang. Interrupting my thoughts with my heart racing, I answered. "Mom?" Sarah's voice was choked up. She had clearly been crying. Is it true everything Margaret told me? I sat slowly in Robert's favorite armchair, feeling the weight of the years and the decisions. "Yes, daughter, it is true." I heard a sob on the other end of the line. "I am so sorry, Mom, so deeply. He convinced me that you were, that your memory was failing, that you needed constant supervision. It was not your fault," I answered, feeling the tears return. "He manipulated us all." "I am at the airport now," said the voice firmer. "I arrive in 3 hours. We are going to face this together, Mom, I promise." When I hung up, I felt a strange mixture of pain and hope. The pain of a family shattered by greed, but the hope of rebuilding something new, something true, with my daughter. That night I slept a surprisingly deep sleep, the sleep of someone who has finally lifted a crushing weight from their shoulders. Waking up the next morning, the first thing I noticed was the absence of that constant anxiety that had become my companion in recent years. The sun came through the slats of the blinds, projecting golden stripes on the bedroom floor. I stayed watching the dust particles dancing in the light for a few moments, feeling a strange peace. The battle was just beginning. I knew it. There would be lawsuits, emotional confrontations, deep wounds to heal. But for the first time in a long while, I felt I was in control of my own life. I got up and went to the window. I opened the blind and let the Chicago sun flood the room. Outside, the city already pulsed with its usual energy. Hurried people cars, the tireless rhythm of urban life. And I, Emily Carter, 67 years old, was finally ready to retake my place in that world. Not as a victim, not as a useless old hag, but as a woman who found strength to say enough. The phone rang again. It was William warning they would be at the apartment in an hour to accompany me to the bank, the first step to recover control of my finances. Will I be ready? I answered with a conviction that surprised myself. Hanging up, I looked at the picture frame with Michael's photo still on the nightstand. With a deep sigh, I opened the drawer and placed the photo inside, not out of anger or revenge, but because it was time to look forward. The past, with its sweet memories and bitter disappointments, needed to stay in the proper place in the past. That Thursday morning, while choosing clothes to wear to the bank, I noticed I was selecting bright colors, the turquoise dress I loved. Robert always liked it, an amber necklace that matched perfectly. Small acts of affirmation, of celebration, of my newly found freedom. The woman who looked in the mirror was no longer the scared shadow of the last years, but someone starting to recognize herself again. The eyes framed by wrinkles that told stories of laughter and tears shone with renewed determination. "You can do this, Emily," I told my reflection. "You were always stronger than you thought." And it was true. The strength was there all along, dormant, waiting for the right moment to wake up. It was necessary to hear those cruel words on the phone, old and useless for something in me, to finally react, refusing to accept that unjust label. While I applied lipstick, a daily gesture I had abandoned recently, I smiled to myself. The battle would be long, but I was ready to fight it, not just for me, but for all the Emilys who felt cornered and without a way out. Because if I, at 67, could find courage to start over, anyone could. The apartment doorbell rang exactly at 8 in the morning. Opening the door, I found William and Mr. Davis, both with determined expressions that matched perfectly with mine. Beside them was Laura, the social worker, holding a folder full of documents. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter." Laura greeted me with a gentle smile. Ready for the big day, I adjusted the amber necklace and nodded firmly, more than ready. Our first stop would be the National Bank at the branch in the Water Tower Place. As we headed there in William's official car, I watched the city pass by the window, the historic buildings of downtown, the trees, bravely resisting urban development, the people walking hurriedly on the sidewalks. Chicago always had that air of discreet efficiency, a city that works without fanfare. The manager was already notified about our visit, informed Mr. Davis looking through some documents, and also about the situation. He is ready to attend us immediately. We arrived at the mall shortly after opening. The movement was still small, with employees opening store doors and the smell of fresh coffee dominating the environment. The bank branch was on the second floor, an elegant installation of glass and metal. We were received by Charles Miller, the manager, a middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses and a worried expression. He led us immediately to his private office. "Mrs. Carter," he started, clearly uncomfortable. "I want to express my sincere concern for what happened. I must admit that flaws in our protocols allowed the situation to reach this point." Mr. Davis intervened with a professional tone. "Exactly why we are here today, Mr. Miller, to correct those flaws and ensure Mrs. Carter's rights are fully restored. In the following 2 hours, we canceled all banking powers of attorney, blocked additional cards, requested new ones with exclusive passwords, and most importantly, started a detailed audit of all transactions of the last 3 years." The manager, visibly worried about possible legal implications for the bank, was extremely cooperative. "Mrs. Carter," he handed me a preliminary report. "We've identified suspicious transfers totaling approximately $60,000 in this period. We're going to continue investigating, but we can already start the dispute process." Sitting there looking at those figures, I felt a mixture of shock and validation. I had not imagined anything. I was not confused or senile as Michael had tried to convince me. It was all real. The systematic theft, the calculated exploitation, the betrayal. "How long will it take to recover that money?" I asked, voice firmer than I expected. Charles hesitated, exchanging glances with Mr. Davis. "Well, there are legal procedures, formal disputes, possible judicial intervention. It will depend on how Michael reacts," explained Mr. Davis. "If he collaborates voluntarily and acknowledges the misappropriation, the process can be faster. Otherwise, we will be prepared for more assertive legal actions." Leaving the bank with a folder full of statements and reports, I felt simultaneously lighter and more determined. Knowledge is power. And for the first time in years, I had complete knowledge of my financial situation. Our next stop was the precinct for elderly protection in Lincoln Park. It was an older building, but well kept, with a welcoming reception that contradicted the stereotype of cold and impersonal police stations. I noticed they had thought of the details: more comfortable chairs, adequate lighting, even a coffee machine available for visitors. "We set up this specialized unit 3 years ago," explained William as he led me down the halls. "Unfortunately, demand only grows." In the interrogation room, we found a young police officer who introduced herself as Officer Carmen Rodriguez. With a kindness that surprised me, she explained the entire process of registering the complaint. "Mrs. Carter, I am going to record your statement if you agree. This saves us the work of transcription and preserves exactly your words and intonation, which can be important for the process." I nodded. And for almost 2 hours, I narrated the whole story from Robert's passing, the first signs of financial control by Michael, the manipulations, the lies, the psychological pressures, until reaching the fateful restaurant call and the confrontation in my apartment. "Ma'am, are you aware that by formalizing this complaint, you will potentially be initiating a criminal process against your son?" asked Carmen seriously. "I am fully aware," I answered, maintaining eye contact. "And I am also fully certain that it is the right thing to do. Not just for me, but because Michael needs to understand the consequences of his actions. After the statement, I signed the official police report. That piece of paper with protocol numbers and official stamps symbolized my refusal to continue being a victim. "What happens now?" I asked as we left the precinct. "Now comes the hardest part," admitted William. "The wait. The judicial system is not as agile as we would like, but we already requested emergency measures like the restraining order, which should be out in 48 hours. And regarding Michael, he will be—" I hesitated, unable to complete the phrase. "Arrested," William completed gently. "Not immediately. He will be summoned to give a statement first. The process will follow according to the evidence and the prosecutor's evaluation." Returning to my apartment, we found Margaret waiting at the door, face illuminated with anxiety. And how did it go? While I recounted the events of the morning, I noticed my friend was not really listening, her eyes fixed on the stairs. "What is it, Margaret?" "Sarah arrived," she said with a half smile. "She is upstairs in my apartment. I thought it would be better if you met here in your territory." My heart raced. I had not seen my daughter in person for almost a year. Our relationship, once so close, had deteriorated under the constant influence of Michael's manipulations. The last phone conversations had been tense, with her clearly believing her brother's version about my supposed cognitive decline. "I am going to call her," said Margaret, already heading to the elevator. Mr. Davis and Laura understood the signal to withdraw. "We will be in touch today," Mrs. Carter assured the lawyer. "Rest a little. It has been an intense morning." William squeezed my shoulder gently. "Do you want me to stay?" "I can wait in the car just in case." I shook my head, grateful for the offer. "It will not be necessary. Sarah is different from her brother always was." When everyone left, I sat on the sofa, suddenly conscious of the exhaustion invading me. The adrenaline of the last 24 hours began to diminish, giving way to a deep exhaustion, not just physical, but emotional. The doorbell rang. I breathed deep before opening the door. Sarah was there, the same green eyes as her father, brown hair now with some silver strands. At 39, my daughter already carried the marks of time and worries. For a moment, we just stood looking at each other, an abyss of unsaid words between us. Then, without warning, she moved forward and hugged me tight. "Mom!" Her voice broke on the simple word. "Forgive me." I took her inside, both crying now. We sat on the sofa, still holding hands like we did when she was a child and needed comfort after a nightmare. "There is nothing to forgive, daughter," I said finally. "You were far away. You depended on the information you received, and Michael was always very convincing." Sarah wiped her tears makeup, leaving smudges on her cheeks. "But I should have realized. I should have questioned more, come to check personally. What kind of daughter does that? Accepts that her mother is senile without even visiting to confirm it? A busy daughter with her own life who trusts her brother," I answered simply. "Do not torture yourself over that. The important thing is that you are here now." In the following hours, I updated Sarah on everything: the collected evidence, the initiated legal measures, the next steps. She listened attentively, occasionally asking questions, horror growing on her face, as the extent of the exploitation became clear. $60,000? She repeated, incredulous, when I mentioned the value identified by the bank. "My God, Mom, how could he? Greed is a vice that is never satisfied." I answered, remembering words my father used to say, "The more you have, the more you want." A thoughtful silence settled between us. Finally, Sarah looked up, determination in her green eyes. "He called me. She said last night I felt a squeeze in my chest." "And what did he say?" "His version, of course, that you are confused, paranoid, that you invented a crazy story of theft because you have dementia, that you hired a scammer lawyer who is manipulating you." She paused. He said, "You want to destroy the family?" I shook my head, not really surprised. It was the next logical move. Try to turn my daughter against me. Create division, sow doubts. "And did you believe him?" I asked softly. "No," she answered firmly. "Not this time." Margaret had already called me before it told me everything in detail. And besides, she hesitated. He sounded like he always sounds when he is lying that slightly high pitch, speaking too fast. I have noticed it since we were kids. I smiled, remembering that same pattern. As a mother, I also always knew when my children were lying, it was a secret language between us, invisible to others. "What do we do now?" asked Sarah. In that moment, the plan forming in my mind since the restaurant call crystallized completely. It was not just about recovering my money or seeking legal justice. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my autonomy, and perhaps more important, using this terrible experience for a greater purpose. Now I answered with a conviction that surprised even myself. We are going to transform this personal tragedy into something that can help others. Sarah tilted her head, intrigued. How? Michael thought I would be an easy victim for being older, for being alone, for being a woman. I am not the first, and unfortunately, I won't be the last. I stood up, walking to the window. But what if we used my story to raise awareness in other people? To show that it is possible to react, that it is never too late to say no. The days that followed while legal procedures advanced at their own pace, Sarah and I worked tirelessly on what we came to call Project Dignity. With her experience in graphic design and my knowledge of information organization, we began to structure a small manual for the elderly on how to identify and combat family financial abuse. Laura, the social worker, was enthusiastic about the idea and brought alarming statistical data about the prevalence of this type of abuse. Most cases are never reported, she explained, during one of our meetings. Victims feel shame, fear of reprisals, or worse, believe they deserve the treatment they receive. A week after the formal complaint, we received the news that the restraining order had been granted. Michael was officially banned from approaching me or my apartment under penalty of immediate arrest. That same afternoon, while we organized information for the manual, the doorbell rang. It was a court officer with a subpoena for Michael to appear at the preliminary hearing at the Chicago Justice Courts. Since they could not locate him at his address, they were trying at my residence. "Does not he live with his wife anymore?" I asked, surprised. The officer shrugged. According to information from neighbors, the couple had a strong argument a few days ago. The wife reportedly demanded he leave. When the officer left, Sarah and I exchanged meaningful glances. "Looks like the house of cards is collapsing," she commented. It was William who brought the most surprising news. 2 days later, Linda sought out the precinct he informed sitting at my dining table. She wants to make a plea deal. "Collaboration?" repeated Sarah, confused. "She is willing to testify against Michael, confirm all the money diversion schemes, the plan to legally incapacitate Mrs. Carter, everything." I felt a chill run down my spine. Why? Why would she do that now? William took a sip of the coffee Sarah had served. Apparently, she found out she was not the only one being deceived. Michael has had an extramarital affair for years with another woman. And guess what? Part of the money diverted from you went to maintain an apartment for this mistress. The revelation should not have surprised me, but still, I felt a twinge of disappointment. Not for the relationship itself, my emotional relationship with Michael was already irremediably compromised, but for the extent of the lie. Layers and layers of deception affecting so many lives. And Susan, her mother, is she also involved in this, I asked? Linda claims yes. According to her, her mother knew everything, even suggested some of the psychological manipulation tactics used against you. The psychologist who used her knowledge not to heal, but to hurt. The bitter irony did not go unnoticed. As days passed, more pieces of the puzzle fit together. The bank investigation revealed a sophisticated pattern of transfers and withdrawals that exceeded what we initially estimated. The total value diverted in the last 3 years was closer to $80,000, practically all my retirement reserves. "How are we going to recover all this?" I asked Mr. Davis during one of our regular meetings. "We are pursuing several avenues," he explained. "Freezing assets in Michael's name-tracking assets, acquired with the diverted money possible restitution agreement as part of eventual plea bargaining. The mention of the plea made me swallow hard. The reality that my son could face prison for his acts was something I still struggled to reconcile with. As a mother, the idea caused pain. As a victim, it seemed fair. It was during one of those difficult conversations about legal consequences that I received an unexpected call. It was Mark Thompson, the manager of the Golden Steer Steakhouse. "Mrs. Carter," he started hesitantly, "sorry to bother you. Your number was provided by the police. They were here collecting footage from the security cameras from the night of the incident with your son." "Yes, Mark, how can I help you?" "Actually, it is the opposite. I want to help you." He paused. "I witnessed the whole scene that night. I saw your son on the phone. I heard the yelling. I noticed the uncomfortable expression of his wife and the other lady. When the police came, I provided not only the footage but also my testimony about his aggressive behavior. I remained silent, processing his words, an outside witness impartial confirming Michael's abusive behavior in public. "Thank you, Mark," I managed to say finally. "That means a lot. It is the least I can do." My grandmother went through a similar situation. No one believed her until it was too late. His voice carried the weight of a painful family history. "If you need anything else, please do not hesitate to contact me." That unexpected call from Mark Thompson marked a turning point in our case, an impartial witness who could corroborate not just Michael's aggressive behavior, but also the dynamic between him, Linda, and Susan. Mr. Davis was exultant with this new piece of the puzzle. "This strengthens our case enormously, Mrs. Carter," he told me when I informed him about the call. "A witness with no family tie, no personal interests in the matter is pure gold for any legal process." 3 weeks after the initial complaint, the day of the preliminary hearing arrived. It was scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. at the Chicago courts. It would be the first time I would meet face-to-face with Michael since that stormy afternoon in my apartment. "Are you sure you want to attend personally?" asked Sarah during breakfast. "Mr. Davis said your presence is not mandatory at this phase." I spread butter on the toast with deliberate calm considering the question. "I need to be there, daughter, not for revenge or to see him humiliated. I need to look him in the eyes and show him I am no longer afraid." The preparations for that day were meticulous. I chose a navy blue suit, sober, elegant, dignified, and the amethyst necklace I rarely wore since Robert's death. It was as if I needed the symbolic strength of those stones of the connection with my late husband to face what was coming. Mr. Davis met us at the entrance of the imposing court building, a modern construction contrasting with the historic buildings around. "Are you ready?" he asked, adjusting his tie. I exchanged a look with Sarah and nodded. I was more ready than I had ever been for anything in life. The interior of the courts was a maze of corridors and identical doors. We followed Mr. Davis to a small waiting room where William already waited, dressed in his official uniform. "News?" asked Mr. Davis in a low voice. William nodded. "Michael arrived 10 minutes ago accompanied by the lawyer. They are in the next room." My heart raced with the proximity so close after weeks of forced distance by the restraining order. "And Linda?" I asked, remembering the plea deal. "She will arrive separately with her own lawyer. She formalized her statement yesterday. She is an important piece in the process now." While we waited, I observed the other people in the room. An elderly couple holding hands, probably involved in some similar process. A young man nervously manipulating his cell phone. A middle-aged woman leafing through a magazine without really seeing it. Each one carrying their own weight, their own search for justice. It was when I noticed a familiar figure entering the room. Susan Miller, Linda's mother, retired psychologist, and now I knew active accomplice in Michael's schemes. Our gazes crossed for a brief moment. She looked away first, sitting as far as possible from us. "Is she also being investigated?" I whispered to William. "Yes, evidence of her participation is substantial, especially after Linda's statement, the mother who helped manipulate an old woman, the daughter who decided to break the cycle of abuse. The complexity of family relationships never ceased to surprise me. At 2:05, a court officer appeared at the door. Carter case parties may enter. The hearing room was smaller than I imagined, more functional than imposing. The judge, Dorothy Reynolds, was a woman of approximately 50 years, gray hair tied in a severe bun, and sharp eyes that seemed to evaluate every detail. And then finally, I saw Michael sitting on the other side of the room. He seemed to have aged years in just weeks. Face thinner, deep dark circles, the posture that once radiated confidence, now hunched under the weight of accusations. Beside him, a middle-aged lawyer with a grave expression. Our eyes met, and for an instant, I saw something in his eyes I did not expect. Shame, not regret, not remorse. Just the shame of someone who was caught red-handed. It was enough to confirm what I already knew. He regretted being discovered, not what he had done. The hearing began with legal formalities, identification of parties, reading of charges, verification of lawyers' presence. The judge's voice was clear and precise without unnecessary inflections. This is a preliminary hearing to evaluate the evidence presented by the prosecution against the accused Michael James Carter, charged with financial abuse against an elderly person, misappropriation threats, and psychological violence. She adjusted her glasses. Given the special circumstances of this case, involving direct family relationship before proceeding formally, I would like to know if there is interest from the parties in a conciliation attempt. Mr. Davis stood up immediately. Your Honor, my client is open to discussing financial compensation for the proven diverted amounts, but insists on the continuation of the criminal process given the severity of the acts committed. Michael's lawyer also spoke up. Your Honor, my client acknowledges the mistakes committed and is willing to make full restitution of the amounts, but requests that mitigating circumstances be considered, including financial difficulties and absence of criminal record. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Carter, would you like to speak? I had not planned to speak, but suddenly I felt the need to express what had been stored for so long. I stood up, legs slightly shaking. Your Honor, I am not here today moved by revenge. I am here because I believe actions must have consequences. My son not only robbed me financially, he robbed me of my peace, my confidence, my dignity. I paused, keeping my voice firm. Money is important, and yes, I want it back. But more important to me is that he understands what he did, that other people like him understand that the elderly are not easy prey, that we will not stay silent, that we deserve respect. A respectful silence followed my words. The judge nodded slightly. Your position is recorded, Mrs. Carter. Let us proceed. The next 2 hours were intense, with presentation of evidence witness statements, including Linda prosecution and defense questions. With every new revelation, every detail exposed of Michael's calculated strategy, I felt a mixture of pain and validation. I had not imagined anything I had not exaggerated. The systematic exploitation was now documented, recorded, impossible to deny. The most surreal moment was when Linda described with a trembling voice how Michael had planned to commit me to an institution against my will using fraudulent medical reports. He had a doctor who would agree to certify that Mrs. Carter suffered from moderate dementia. Even without examining her properly, she related. The plan was to use that certificate to obtain full legal guardianship. The judge frowned, visibly disturbed. And did you agree with that plan, Mrs. Carter? Linda looked down. At that moment, yes. He convinced me it was for her own good that she was no longer in a condition to live alone. A pause loaded with remorse. Today I know I was complicit in something terrible, and I am here to try to repair at least part of the damage caused. When the hearing finally came to an end, the judge announced she would make her decision on the continuation of the process within 72 hours. Given the solidity of the evidence presented and the gravity of the accusations, I determined the maintenance of the restraining order in force and establish as an additional condition that the accused deposit judicially, within 30 days, the full amount identified in the expertise as having been misappropriated. As we prepared to leave, I noticed Michael continued looking at me, not with rage or defiance as I expected, but with something that seemed almost like pleading. "He wants to talk to you," murmured Mr. Davis, noticing too. "It is your decision if you want to allow it, but I would not recommend it without the presence of lawyers." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to avoid any contact, preserve the emotional distance I had managed to establish. But another part, that stubbornly maternal part that never disappears completely, wanted to hear what he had to say. "We can talk right here, with everyone present." I decided. Mr. Davis signaled to Michael's lawyer, who conferred briefly with his client before nodding. We met in the center of the room, now almost empty, with the lawyers, Sarah and William, forming a protective circle around us. Up close, Michael's physical deterioration was even more evident. The man, once vain and always impeccably groomed, seemed disheveled, unshaven, and with deep, dark circles. "Mom," he started, voice hoarse. "Do not call me that," I interrupted, surprised by the firmness of my own voice. "You lost that right when you decided to treat me like an obstacle, not your mother." He recoiled as if he had been slapped. "Mrs. Carter," then he corrected, swallowing hard. "I know there is no excuse for what I did. I am not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I am going to return every dollar. I already sold the car. I am selling the apartment. It is not about the money I cut in again. It never was. It is about trust. It is about respect. It is about dignity." I paused, organizing my thoughts. "You called me a useless old hag. That is how you saw me, as a useless burden, good only for the money you could extract from me." Michael looked away, unable to face the direct question. His silence was answer enough. "I thought I had taught you better values." I continued, voice softer now. "Your father and I worked so hard to give you and Sarah a good life, a solid moral education. At what point did you decide that exploiting your own mother was acceptable?" "It was the debts," at first, he murmured. "Linda's architecture firm was going under. We had creditors banging on the door. It was just once, I thought. Just a loan I would pay back. Then came another and another." He ran his hand through his disheveled hair. "Then it became too easy. You trusted me so much, and I got used to having that money, that lifestyle." The unexpected frankness took me by surprise. There was no justification in his eyes, just a naked and raw confession of the progression of abuse. "Do you have any idea of the damage you caused? Not just financial, but emotional. You made me doubt my own sanity, Michael. You isolated me from my friends. You made me feel I was a burden that did not deserve respect." My voice failed slightly. "That is something no money can repair." He nodded slowly, eyes now wet. "I know, and I will have to live with that for the rest of my life." A heavy pause. "Linda left me. We are getting divorced. I lost my job when the news of the lawsuit spread. I lost everything. I did not feel the satisfaction he perhaps expected with that revelation, just a deep sadness for the waste of trust, of love, of a family that could have been different. You made your choices, Michael. Now you will have to live with the consequences." I looked at Sarah, who watched the scene with a tense expression. Maybe one day, far in the future, we can find some kind of peace. But for now, the only thing I can offer is the promise that this process will follow its legal course, without emotional interference, from my part neither for worse nor for better. With those words, I considered the conversation over. We left the courts in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The Chicago sky was heavy, announcing one of those fast and intense storms so characteristic of the city. In the car, Sarah finally broke the silence. "You were incredible in there, Mom. So firm, so dignified. I do not feel incredible," I confessed. "I feel exhausted, as if I had run an emotional marathon. And that is what it was. You faced your own son in a court. You exposed a painful story. You maintained your integrity the whole time. If that is not strength, I do not know what is." 3 days later, we received the official notification. The judge had determined the continuation of the criminal process against Michael, accepting in full the accusations made by the prosecution. Linda, for her collaboration, would receive legal benefits in her own process. Susan would face separate charges for complicity. While the legal process advanced at its own pace, an unexpected turn completely changed the course of our story. Mr. Davis contacted me one morning, his voice transmitting a mixture of surprise and excitement. "Mrs. Carter, I need to see you urgently. Something has come up, something that could change everything." An hour later, Mr. Davis was in my living room with a thick manila envelope on the table. His eyes shone with an intensity I had not seen before. "This arrived at my office this morning. It comes from the firm Miller & Associates. Apparently, Mr. Robert Carter, your late husband, left specific instructions with them. They were to deliver this envelope to me if you ever became involved in a legal process against Michael." My heart skipped a beat. Robert knew? Did he know this could happen? Apparently, yes, and he prepared for it. Mr. Davis pushed the envelope gently towards me. "I think you should open it yourself." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside were legal documents, old photographs, and a handwritten letter with Robert's unmistakable handwriting. I began to read. "My dear Emily, if you are reading this, it means that what I always feared has happened. Michael finally showed his true nature, and you found the strength to confront him. There is something I never told you, something I have carried as a secret for decades. Years ago, my Uncle Vincent left me some land on the outskirts of Chicago, near Naperville. At that time, they were rural plots without much value. I decided to keep them as a silent investment separate from our usual finances. With the city's growth, those lands have acquired considerable value. According to the last appraisal, they would be valued at over $2 million. I have kept this property in a trust under the name of my sister Elizabeth, who agreed to be the legal administrator, knowing everything was really for you. The reason for this secret was simple. I always perceived something worrying in Michael. Since he was little, he showed signs that unsettled me. The subtle manipulation, the lack of empathy, the obsession with material possessions. I wanted to make sure you had a financial backup he could not touch in case he ever tried to take advantage of you. This trust could only be revealed if you ever faced Michael legally, as it would be the definitive proof that you had finally seen what I always feared seeing. There is something else you must know, Emily. Something that perhaps explains many things. Michael is not my biological son I always knew. You came to our marriage pregnant from your previous relationship with Richard, that university professor. I decided to raise him as my own. We never mentioned the subject and with time almost forgot that truth, but maybe that explains why I always felt a distance with him that never existed with Sarah. I do not blame you for anything. I loved you from the first day to the last. I only regret not having been there to protect you when the inevitable finally happened. Elizabeth is aware you would receive this letter. She will help you with the transfer of properties. Use it wisely, my love. Rebuild your life, and if possible, use part of that money to help others in similar situations. You always had a generous heart. With eternal love, Robert. Tears ran down my cheeks when I finished reading. Sarah, who had remained silent beside me, was also crying. Mr. Davis gave us a moment to process all that. "The attached documents are all legal and in order," he said finally. "The trust exists, the lands are real, and according to the latest appraisal are worth even more than your husband estimated. Mrs. Elizabeth Carter was already contacted and is willing to meet with you whenever you wish. It took me time to assimilate all that. Robert, my Robert, always so quiet, so prudent, had seen what I refused to see. He had prepared to protect me even after his death. And that secret about Michael's paternity explained so much and at the same time opened so many new questions." A week later, I met with Elizabeth Roberts' sister. I had not seen her since the funeral. She hugged me tight, her eyes so similar to her brother's. He always knew this day might come, she told me, but he trusted you would find the strength to face it. He had so much faith in you, Emily. The transfer of assets was surprisingly simple, thanks to Robert's meticulous planning. Suddenly, I went from fighting to recover my retirement savings to being the owner of extraordinarily valuable lands. The twist of fate was almost unreal. When Mr. Davis asked what I wanted to do with this new fortune, the answer came to me with absolute clarity. I want to use part of it to expand Project Dignity, I said. Not just as a manual or some workshops, but as a real foundation with national presence. I want to create a shelter for elderly victims of abuse, offer free legal advice, helplines, everything I would have needed if I had not counted on Margaret William and everyone else. Sarah smiled, squeezing my hand. Dad would be so proud. 2 months later, we bought a building in Lincoln Park that would become the headquarters of the Dignity Foundation. We hired lawyers, psychologists, social workers, created educational materials, awareness campaigns, and most importantly, a safe space where vulnerable elderly people could find support and understanding. As for Michael, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 2 years. The sentence was reduced considering his late collaboration and partial restitution of assets. Occasionally, I received news of him through his lawyer. He was participating in a rehabilitation program teaching math to other inmates, apparently seeking some kind of personal redemption. I had not visited him. Maybe one day I would find the strength for that. For now, I was focused on my own path of healing, on rebuilding the relationship with Sarah, on the work with the Dignity Foundation, which now served dozens of elderly people weekly. The revelation about Michael's true paternity stayed between Sarah and me. We decided nothing would be gained by sharing that information with him at this moment. Maybe years later, when wounds were not so fresh, we could address that complex truth. Meanwhile, life followed its course. The foundation grew, expanding to Minneapolis and Detroit. I began giving talks, sharing my experience to inspire others. Sarah decided to move definitely back to Chicago, assuming an active role in the foundation. One afternoon, while we organized an event for the foundation's anniversary, we received an unexpected visit. Linda, accompanied by Mark, the restaurant manager, who had testified in our favor. "I hoped I could talk to you, Mrs. Carter," said Linda, visibly nervous. "I have been working as a volunteer with the elderly, trying to repair some of the damage I helped cause. When I learned of the work you are doing here, I thought maybe I could contribute in some way." I looked at her closely. She seemed sincere, genuinely repentant. And after all, she had also been in a way a victim of Michael's manipulations. "There is always room for those who want to be part of the solution," I answered, extending my hand especially for those who understand the problem from the inside. Thus, our small improvised family grew not based on blood ties, but on shared values and the determination to transform painful experiences into something positive. In those moments, sometimes I thought of Robert and how even from beyond, he had found a way to protect me, to give me the means for this transformation. His foresight, his silent but vigilant love, had been the foundation on which I now built my new life. At 68, when many thought my productive life was over, I discovered a new purpose, a new passion, a new way of existing in the world, not as a victim, but as a survivor, as a guide, as inspiration for others. The useless old hag Michael had tried to reduce me to being had become an unstoppable force of social change, and it all started with a simple decision that winter night to say no to abuse, hang up that phone and begin to claim my dignity one step at a time. Today, 3 years after that call that changed everything, I understand how a single decision can completely transform the course of our lives. When I decided not to accept Michael's abuses anymore, I did not imagine the extraordinary journey awaiting me. From a 67-year-old lady, intimidated and manipulated, I transformed into a voice for so many other elderly people facing similar situations. My story began, like so many others, with the vulnerability that emerged after losing my life partner. Robert had been my safe harbor for more than 4 decades, and his departure left a void that my son decided to fill, not with genuine love and care, but with control and exploitation. Little by little, Michael assumed dominion over my finances, my freedom, and even my self-perception. He made me doubt my own mind, isolated me from my friends, absorbed not only my retirement, but also my dignity. It was necessary to hit rock bottom hearing my own son call me a useless old hag during that stormy call to wake up in me the strength that was dormant. With the invaluable help of people like Margaret William, Mr. Davis, and Laura, I began to document the abuses, collect evidence, trace a plan to regain control of my life. The confrontation in my apartment was just the beginning. When Michael realized I would not yield anymore, that I would not accept his manipulations, the mask of the dedicated son fell completely. The rage I saw in his eyes that day confirmed I was making the right choice, however painful it might be. The legal process that followed was exhausting. Every statement, every evidence presented, every detail exposed of the calculated plan to exploit me financially and eventually declare me incompetent, all that opened deep wounds. But it also brought validation. I had not imagined anything. I was not confused or paranoid as they tried to make me believe. The abuse was real, documented, undeniable. The conviction of Michael, Linda, and Susan brought a strange type of closure, not joy or satisfaction, but the certainty that actions have consequences. The judicial system, so often criticized for its slowness, worked. Justice in its imperfect but necessary form prevailed. But my story did not end in court. Actually, it was there that a new chapter began. The discovery of Robert's secret will was like a hand extended from the past, offering me not only financial security, but also the confirmation that I was not alone in my perception of Michael. Robert had always seen what I refused to see and had prepared to protect me even after his departure. The revelation about Michael's true paternity opened painful questions, but also offered a context that helped understand part of our complex family dynamic. Sarah and I decided to keep that secret, at least for now. There are truths that need the right moment to be shared. The Dignity Foundation, born of my personal experience, has become a beacon for other elderly people suffering similar abuses. The manuals we created have already helped hundreds of families identify early signs of exploitation. The weekly workshops have become safe spaces where victims can share their stories, find support, and mainly practical strategies to protect themselves. Seeing the project expand to other cities, inspire public policies that has brought a meaning to my experience I could never have foreseen. The useless old hag I was once called now leads an initiative that is literally saving lives, preserving assets, and restoring the dignity of so many other elderly people. My relationship with Sarah, which had deteriorated under Michael's manipulative influence, blossomed again. My daughter not only returned to Chicago to be closer, but also became an integral part of the project, using her design skills to make our messages more accessible and impactful. As for Michael, the road has been more complex. After 2 years serving his sentence, he began sending letters first, brief, almost formal, then gradually more reflective. I do not know if one day I will manage to forgive him completely, but I recognize the signs that he is at least trying to understand the gravity of what he did. Forgiveness, as I discovered, is not a point of arrival, but a continuous journey. Sometimes we advance, sometimes we retreat, and that is okay. At 70 today, I feel stronger, more secure, and ironically younger in spirit than when this journey began. I learned that age is not synonymous with fragility, that life experience can be our greatest strength when we face challenges. For you who accompanied me this far in this story, I want to say that every word shared had a purpose. To show that it is never too late to say no to abuse, that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, but of courage, and that our voice matters no matter how many wrinkles we have on our face. If this story has moved you in any way, I ask you to share it. Not necessarily my personal story, but the message it carries. Talk about financial abuse against the elderly. Be attentive to signs in your own family. Be that person who extends a hand when someone needs support. And if you like this account, please subscribe to the Elderly Stories channel. Every new subscriber represents one more conscious person, one more ally in the fight against elderly abuse. Leave your like. This helps our content reach more people who might be needing exactly this message right now. Your comments are particularly valuable to me. Do you know someone who has gone through a similar situation? What would you do in my place? Is there any aspect of my story that moved you especially? Each comment not only enriches our community, but also gives me strength to continue sharing experiences that I know well are not easy to relive. If you can take a look at the other videos on the channel, there are so many important stories being told here, some painful, others inspiring, all deeply human and true. They are accounts that give voice to a generation that is often silenced or ignored. I need to also mention something important. Creating quality content like this demands time dedication and resources. If our mission resonates with you, consider supporting the channel through the thanks button, our way of receiving donations. Even small amounts make a huge difference, allowing us to continue bringing daily videos, expanding our reach, and improving content quality. Your contribution would help immensely our work, enabling us to reach more people, hire more professionals to assist in production, bring these stories to platforms and spaces not yet explored. With your support, we can transform Elderly Stories not just into a story channel, but into a movement of awareness about the rights and dignity of the elderly. As I conclude this account, I want to leave a final thought. When I received that call 3 years ago with my son calling me a useless old hag, I never imagined that moment of humiliation would transform into the catalyst of such a profound change, not only in my life, but in the lives of so many others. The words that intended to diminish me ended up becoming the impulse for me to find my true strength. This taught me that our greatest pains can become our greatest sources of power when we decide to transform them into something greater than ourselves. If you are going through a difficult situation, now know that your story does not end in this painful chapter. You have the power to rewrite it, to find meaning, even in the most traumatic experiences. Thank you for dedicating your time to listen to my story. I hope with all my heart it has planted a seed of hope, of courage, of possibility, that you know it is never too late to claim your dignity, to say enough to start over. And remember, subscribe to the Elderly Stories channel, leave your like, share with whoever needs to hear these words, comment your own experience, and if possible, support our work through the thanks button. Together we can build a world where the elderly are treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. Until the next story. With love, Emily Carter.